Well, hello, good afternoon. I'm not an attorney, so I guess that's why people are here as opposed to the other room, right? So what I'm going to talk to you for the next, 45 minutes roughly, if I have my time right, is we're going to talk about getting permission to break things. And it's an odd thing. You come to these BSides events, right? And they tell you all these cool tools that you can use to break into stuff, right? Hopefully you've seen like the Ukraine and going into those SCADA systems, and basically it was the malware. They established the point of presence. They VPN in, and they talk about some of the tools that are in place there, and they talk about doing a penetration test, right, so that you can test your system before someone else does. Let me first get a show of hands. How many people actually do penetration tests as part of your day-to-day work? Anybody? Nobody. Okay. All right. This is good. How many of you hire penetration testers? Okay, I see 2 or 3 hands. Okay. Let's see. How many you hire? How many hate penetration testers? Well, that's actually part of why I made this talk, was because people tend to hate the penetration testers. And so in this talk, I try to take a little bit of my experience. And by day, I'm the mild-mannered VP of Information Services at a financial services institution. I recently changed hats, though. And so now when I'm talking with vendors, they oftentimes hate me because I'm asking for them for things in the contracts. Why? Because I was the consultant for several years. I was the consultant that would go into a financial services firm or a healthcare firm or a utilities firm. And they're bringing me in for one reason. And of course, I really want to help them do the best thing the best thing possible, right? And one of the things we learn is that there's this happy medium and the setting of ground rules and safe words, like get out of jail cards. And, what does the customer want? And also, there are some things in this talk that if you are a company who is contracting with a penetration tester, you can keep these things in mind, because your company that you're hiring may not know this or may not tell you this, right? And it's important. So it's important for both sides to know this, right? I do adjunct instruct as well, online, health information technology, and I have found very few certifications I did not like. So CISSP, Certified Ethical Hacker, the ISACA, CISA, CISM, and so, and any statements here, I have to have my disclaimer. I'm not an attorney, and I don't play one on TV. Also, any statements I make are of my own and not of my present or previous employers. So, why can't I? Why can't I do a penetration test? Why can't I just go download this cool thing that I heard about BSides this week? Well, because you don't have permission. That's one of the key things, right? Certified ethical hacker is the part of the ethics is that you have permission. You have an explicit authority to do what you're going to do, right? Someone's giving you permission to break things. And if you do this without permission, it's going to affect your job security. You're going to find yourself demoted, asked to stay home, possibly permanently, not get another job. And it's a very small industry, really. I think I see a lot of folks here that I've seen at like Temple events and other BSides events. We know each other, right? We know what goes on, right? So why can't you do a penetration test? Here's the part that actually the business is concerned about, these last 2 bullets. See, there's this part where you affect the business of the customer. And in a financial services, I put an example up there that the teller, when she takes your money, when you're making a deposit, right? The teller can't key in your deposit. No big deal, right? They can do it on paper. I've seen them do it. It's business continuity. But then there's the more severe scenario there, whereas I, as a customer, can't even hand them cash because their systems are completely offline, or maybe they only have an ATM. And now I, as a customer, am feeling direct hurt because some pen tester took down an ATM machine. Okay? Coming from healthcare, I used to love this in the covered entities in the hospitals. Okay? They would tell me point blank about this one here. I have a patient who's going to die on the table. And that's definitely, that's going to affect the patient. If I take off any of those monitoring systems or anything like that. So we need to establish the fact that we have to get proper permissions first. We need to set the scope and the boundaries and what is included, what's not included, right? And we need to get a bit of buy-in, right? And this is a bit of negotiation. One of the key things is who can authorize it, right? I could go to one person. Do they really have the power to do it? What is their scope of even their authority, right? If it's within IT, have they talked to the chief medical officer? That was a big issue, right? Or have they talked with any of the other accounting departments about their processes that they're running? And, do they have the necessary power, or are they working in that little silo, right? And is there communication between those departments? Do they know what's going on, right? Did I know that your call center at your retail establishment was going to take all these calls on Black Friday? Yeah, as a pen tester, I should know. I would probably not do a pen test of a retail establishment, as of a week ago to like January 1st. I probably would stay away from that because this is their peak business time, right? And so if I'm talking with IT, I got to make sure that they've involved the other people in that as well, that there's communication. Hey, your systems may go offline because we're going to do this pen test. And, okay, why would they do that, right? I'm saying, okay, don't do it during Black Friday time. Don't do it during the holiday season. You know why they might still do it? If they have an audit or contractual requirement and they forgot to do it. So that's where you got to balance the needs sometimes, right? What are the needs of the customer? Are they just trying to comply with an audit requirement? Or is it part of a contractual requirement? Does anybody here deal with credit card data? Right? PCI compliance, must have your scans done every quarter, right? A full pen test every year, right? By an outside third party, right? So sometimes that's that requirement that comes into place that you have to do this pen test, right? Other times, I've done one where it was just they wanted to win the most wired or something. It was some, high tech for hospitals. So actually their need for a pen test was really low because they just wanted to check the box that said they had done one. So what are their needs, right? And are they trying to be proactive? If you were in the other room, they talked about that pyramid, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Did anyone sit in that last presentation about the power crisis, the power shutdown? Right? Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I wanted to put this on the slide as I heard his talk because I was like, you know what? Yeah. There's that basic requirement that if it's a contractual requirement, that's like Maslow's basic need. I need food, right? And then you get into the higher levels of it's an audit best practice versus its proactive security, going up much like Maslow did in that hierarchy of needs. Sometimes they're just doing a penetration test because they want to validate the remediation efforts. In fact, if they've been breached, maybe that's driving their need for this pen test. Right? And maybe that scope already tells you. Or maybe in the course of that remediation effort, it helps you define what you're going to include or exclude. So the customers of a pen test, you've got management within the firm, right? Your management, senior management. I've known managers who want to do a penetration test. And this will be someone who's on the board of directors. And they want to do that penetration test, right? Other times you get the management who's kind of kicking and screaming their feet, right? Who are those players? What are their concerns? You may be working with a compliance department. You may be dealing with a risk department. Sometimes you are proving your own work, right? Every so often, maybe you've done all these new changes, and you're going to test your own work. So who are those customers, right? And the external customers, if you're dealing with someone outside of your own organization, especially those of you who are in a consulting role, you have to make it a little palatable to them, right? Actually, we have to make it palatable to our internal folks sometimes, too. We have to sell them on the whole idea. But how many folks work for consulting organizations or contracted type organizations, service providers? Got a few of you here, right? Okay. It's really cool to break stuff, right? That means you did your job, right? But they don't necessarily, have they really bought onto that, right? How do you make it sound like something they should do? Because you don't want to just be that, you're going to do the pen test just because everyone else is doing it. right? So, the credit card, you have to do it because it's a PCI requirement. That's a contractual requirement. We have to do it. But anyone who doesn't have a contractual requirement, how are you going to make it palatable to them, right? How are you going to make it sound like something that's a good practice to do, right? And you want to stay within their comfort range / decide to clarify their level of pain, okay? Because sometimes there is a bit of pain in a pen test because you took a system offline or you found systems that were out of date. And now people have to go patch all these things, right? There's a lot, like you found these weaknesses in controls, so you're causing them some pain. Maybe you did cause an outage, all right? How many, it's inevitable, right? You run a scan, you think everything's fine, and then you find out the printers have been spewing reams of paper, right? There's a certain vendor product that I used to have to babysit because that's what it wanted to do. And I couldn't tell it not to really well, so I just had to babysit it. Otherwise, there'd be tons of paper all over the place. And ironically, that was a real source of pain for them. Stop the paper. So I'd have to babysit it and make sure, you're on a printer, stop. Right? What is their level of downtime? Do you have to, this colors your hours of work, right? Can you do it during Monday through Friday, 9 to 5? Or can you do it at night? Right? How are you going to schedule this to them? What kind of system malfunction are they willing to tolerate? Do they have fault tolerance? Meaning multiple data centers. If you've got one data center, that pain's going to hurt you a lot more, isn't it? Versus if I took down a call center in, Columbus, Ohio, they just route my call to somewhere in Utah or somewhere in Florida or something like that. What kind of pain can the customer tolerate if I take a system down? Do they have another one to back it up? That they could just flip the switch and go, right? So, and with external customers, we want repeat customers usually, don't we? It's a lot harder to get that person to ask you to do work for you, right? And you like to go back in year after year after year. It's nice to see new hospitals, new stores, new credit card companies, but it's also nice to see the old ones again. It's a lot easier to get your job done on subsequent years usually. So you have to address the customer's needs. How many folks here actually write the reports? Anybody? Couple people? 3 people? Do we love the reports that come out of the tools? No. It's not really intelligent, is it? And and of course you get management, right? Someone with an MBA. And they know all about the business, right? They know all about your insurance field or your banking field or your retail field, your manufacturing field. They know all of this stuff, and you tell them something about obsolete version of AIX. And what happens? There's that, their eyes just glaze over. They tune out. What do you mean? Right? Or, what if you give them a report of everything? Oh my God, I give up. I feel like the Aflac duck. With like 5 million holes in that boat, right? So, sometimes you have to take that report and try to drive home because maybe you start finding trends. And this helps, increase the customer satisfaction on this job, right? But also, this is something you negotiate going into it. Like, hey, what do you want your report to look like? You ask it up front, so when you get to the final end, you're not guessing at it, right? You know what their important parts are. You want to address their reporting needs. I found that most people don't like drinking from the fire hose. And I'll have to give you the full appendix of like 120 pages of every single vulnerability because you asked me to scan every single system. But it's going to be an appendix. I'm going to have a front section of the report. It's going to tell you sort of an action plan of what you can do. For the one client, we had about another 30 pages. But then we had 120 pages behind that. And I said, if you really want to drink from the fire hose, because we had someone say they wanted it, it was purposely portioned off that way. If you want to see every single system and every single vulnerability, here it is. But we're going to produce you a section of the report that you can actually take some action on and sort of give some intelligence to. And the other thing I've noticed here, if anyone's been a customer that's received a penetration test report, and it says that everything's fine. Anyone get any of those? No? No one? I've seen them. And I'm like, really? I think to myself, really? You found nothing? Nothing? Did you bring my IPS tea and cookies too? Because, well, you know what happens? I don't know. We have Tenable here. And they have their product Nessus, right? I don't know if you Nessus. Nexpose is the Rapid7's product that does vulnerability assessment. If you don't tune that thing back and you just let it go full bore on your network, the IPS snags it and you get a nice empty report because the IPS takes over, right? So you really need to look at those tools and make sure, as testers, we're going to need to give them a report that's good, right? So, if we don't have permission, it's unethical. It's just yet another attack on people, right? And this would be the scenario of, I'll just say I remember one company that had somebody that took a virtual machine running Linux, and they thought it was really cool to run a evaluation copy of Metasploit Pro. What was the problem with that? Nobody knew it was there, right? People started going, what the hell is this? How the heck do we tell you versus from the attackers from the outside? And she didn't win a lot of friends. She actually was looking for work about 3 months later. And it took her about 3 months, but she was looking for work. She made a lot of enemies. And actually, she didn't get a lot of positive results either, because they shut her down before she could actually find anything. So she started kicking this off. It spewed all this noise out there. And also, because she didn't have permission, what happened to anybody who looked at that report? What did they actually see when they looked at that report that she said, look, see what I did? What do you think they actually saw? Your little game on my network that caused me my network outage, and I'm supposed to be happy with this? So people, that thing that she put out there, that partial report, did they even look at it with a positive light at all? No, this is just evidence that you attacked your own network, right? One of the things we see too is when you establish a permission, you start saying what systems are in scope, right? If you don't have a scope defined, you have no end. You don't know when this game is over. You just keep going and going and going. So when you obtain permission, this is one of the things we have to do, but we negotiate this whole thing, right? What are the levels though? It's not just can I run a pen test, yes or no. This is one of the other key points here, right? The decision is not just am I going to run a pen test. What systems? Remember I said the scenario of the call centers? Different sites, right? I'm going to limit myself to one site. I'm going to limit myself to certain types of systems, right? What kind of attacks are allowed? Maybe, and quite often, we have to do, in order to get full permission, we'll actually negotiate where we'll do a vulnerability scan first, see the systems that are out there, then go back to the customer and say, now, which of these systems would you like us to scan? Right? Sometimes we have to do that. We have to do that, go back and forth, right? Because maybe we find something we weren't supposed to find. And why do they care? Fragile systems, the fragile systems, right? They're the old systems that are not patched, or there are ICS systems or SCADA systems that could affect key functionality. Maybe you're not going to allow people to do manual scripting. Maybe it's all automated testing, and that's all you're willing to do at that point, right? What constitutes a failure of a system? When do you stop, right? Of hey, if I find XYZ information, if I, for instance, were to if I were going to reach into an MRI system and I see an image, do I try to go beyond that or do I stop, right? If I compromise a VPN endpoint, is that where I stop, right? Because at that point we have the assumption that I could continue on, right? Do I get domain credentials and that's when I stop, right? Do I say, okay, I've got domain creds, We're going to stop right now because it could basically be assumed I could get into anything else I want at that point. And sometimes that's what it is, right? It's not just, sometimes the customer will say, hey, I want you to go attack everything. But a lot of times it's just, okay, tell me how far you can get, but at a certain point I'm going to tell you to stop. We can just draw the conclusions. And are there any legal issues with the data that you're accessing, right? What is this customer? Are there any non-disclosure? There should always be non-disclosure agreements in place anytime you enter into these. I know that's that lawyer talk over there. He's talking about non-disclosure agreements anytime you agree to a penetration test, that you're not going to divulge any secrets, you're going to give the, they're going to receive the evidence. There are some legal issues that you need to be aware of, like if you observe a crime, a legal crime, you may need to elevate that to law enforcement. Now, confidentiality for these projects, PCI, you're accessing credit card data, right? Anything you find on a penetration test is really that customer's, it's not yours. There are privacy issues. Some of the regulations we have, I asked like, okay, healthcare, who's healthcare? So we see HIPAA, right? How many work in education? Nobody? You would be FERPA, because if you're dealing with student loans, you have student information. GLBA? Any bankers here? So, GLBA applies to you. Maybe PCI, depending how the business is molded, right? Are you publicly traded? Are there any Sarbanes-Oxley issues that we have to be aware of as we're looking at these systems? And privacy rules, we have in the U.S. federal rules, and then we'll have state rules, and then we'll have local government rules, and then we also have industry-based rules. So a lot of these, like the HIPAA and the FERPA, they're based on a segment of industry. What if I was dealing with a company that has European customers in that system? Has anybody worked in a multinational organization? Were you able to see everything for US and North America and Europe and Asia? No. You can see Hong Kong, or you can't. That's the way it's been. I work for an organization where we had a European counterpart. And if my system accidentally picked up anything that was connected with anybody in Europe, I was no longer allowed to do anything else with it. And I had to just sort of hands off. Because of the rules that you can't exfiltrate that data across country lines. We're seeing that. Cross-boundary issues. And it gets a little murky, too, with a cloud service provider. Can you pen test your cloud service provider? Definitely not without permission, and probably not. That's going to be one of those you're going to have to negotiate very, very clearly, right? We have those cloud, various service providers. Can I attack a service provider? What do you think? Why not? Because it's a shared service. It's not just yours. So if I do a denial of service on a service provider, I didn't just test my own service. I tested everyone else's. And no one else can get to. So I can cause outage for others. So, what's in scope? We look at our types of networks. There's that external, right? Internet-facing attack. There's that internal, right? We see different results, don't we? Different types of scope that we define there. Extranet. Do we need to get permission to penetrate every single desktop in our environment? What do you think? Some people say yes. Yeah, I've had clients like that. Yep, scan them all. Scan 2,000 machines. You know what we find? Actually, if you sample them, pick a random sample. So they'd sit there and they'd be like, yep, I want you to scan all of these machines. Well, I might do a vulnerability scan on all the machines. Okay, that's fair. But then we would go into a penetration test phase. I say, you know what? I'm only going to do certain floors. Or I'm going to pick a random 10 systems in each one of those floors, actually. because I don't need to take the full time of affecting all of the systems. Remember that pain point with the customer? If they've got 20 machines and you limit your test to only 10, what does that mean for the customer, for the business processes? Huh? It's less painful because they could go use the other 10 systems, right? You know, it's always fun when they have Norton, the semantic protection suite, right? The host-based intrusion protection software. What does it do when you try to pen test it? Or even vulnerability scanning. It just comes up, tons of pop-ups, right? And it's like, what can you do about that? No, this is my job. I have to do it, right? This is part of that getting permission and that communication, right? So if you're working with the IT team, they would need to talk to that department to make sure they know, hey, by the way, if you see any pop-ups on your screen, this is a good time to go get a cup of coffee. Because it's one of those things, right? You get the tons of pop-ups for like 5 minutes, and then it's done, right? And if you try to fight it, you know, it was hard to get work done anyway. It was actually funny. One of the customers were sitting there in the room. We're like, yep, we know this is going to happen. And they were like, hey, I can't access my application. Yep, we knew that was going to happen. Because you're getting all these pop-ups and because we're saturating the network for that, you know, for that one department. But you know, it actually is 12:30. Why aren't you at lunch? So, making sure folks know, and actually that's why I put this point here about statistic or judgmental scopes. You could do like a statistical, like 10% sampling, right? Or 20%. And you could just say, I'm going to take 20% of the machines just at random, right? Kind of like the way I do a phishing test sometimes. I'll just take a whole bunch of users and I'll just send them phishing emails, and I don't care what department you're in, and I don't care if you failed a previous test, and I'll just take a random, statistical random sample. Other times, I will take a judgmental sample. What kind of things do you think I might put on a judgmental scope to include in a pen test? Certain departments? Any other idea? What else might you do for judgmental scope? Where you're cherry-picking systems. Oh, yeah.
Secretary, C-level, stuff like that.
Oh, yeah. I was going to say the secretary of the C-level as a prime one, right? That's a judgmental scope. You say, you know what? I'm going to pick like a couple staff workers, a couple power users, and I'm going to, like, I've gotten tons of DLP error messages from these 5 people, and they're always going to these weird websites. Yeah, I might want to look at that system, right? I might sort of take some opinions and go, I think these systems are going to be a problem. So, okay. So, yeah, departments, groups. See, if I say department, I just hit everybody in medical, or I hit everybody at a branch, right? But judgmental gets into that, you know, I think this system is a problem. I see a system that says Windows 98, so I'm going to, like, sample, I'm going to use those as my sample, right? And when you start looking at other devices, too, remember the printers, and you get, like, the reams of paper coming out of it? I might do 1 or 2, but I'm not going to do the whole fleet, right? I might do your credit card printers, you know, the instant issue devices, the register printers. I might do part of your phone system, right? Because phones these days are voice over IP, right? Used to be, oh, who cares? It's just a phone. I don't know. Maybe there's a way to actually leapfrog from the phone system into the production network, because they have this handy-dandy jack on the back that connects to the network. You know? Some of these other devices, though, you know, we have to watch out for certain pitfalls. Check printers and instant issue, you know, credit cards, debit cards, you know. The manufacturing controls, a lot of that hardware wasn't designed to require authentication or encryption. And if we're attaching to something on a production network, what's it going to do to the manufacturing line? Right? The SCADA, NERC SIP, our critical infrastructure protection, right? Biomedical devices. This is a really tricky one because most vendors say you are never, ever allowed to patch them. So it's kind of weird. I could do a penetration test on it, and it's useful maybe to see what's out there, but I can't do anything about it. So it's one of those things I'm like, yeah, I can do this, but I can't patch it. Unless somebody's willing to cough up money for all those new machines. Or segment them to another network. But I want to be careful because remember, these biomedical devices, I had to be very careful. If I was working in a hospital, I want to make sure that their IP addresses are set up properly, right? And I need to know this going into it. Because they might give me permission to scan, like, the patient rooms, right? Hopefully, they've segmented their network so that the biomedical devices that are connected to patients are not in the same IP ranges. And I say hopefully, because I've been on that test where we ran a pen test and we found that there was no segmentation. And thankfully, we just started with the vulnerability scan, and as we started seeing results come in, we were like, hey, we're going to stop some of these machines because we're seeing things we shouldn't see out there. Right? And we don't want to affect patient care. Right? So just because you have permission doesn't mean you run them over either. Multifunction devices, you cause denial of service where they can't do legitimate printouts. Right? Wireless access points. Don't want to cause an outage there again. Catastrophic failures, these are the ones that, we want to avoid these, right? And when we're asking for permission, we should include these kinds of questions, right? What are your core systems, right, that if I take it down today are going to cause pain? What's going to stop you from taking care of that customer, right? Is it one of those things where I'm going to saturate all the buffers and it looks like it's running fine, but then tomorrow morning it dies? So if I have those kind of devices on the network as a tester, when I'm asking permission, what would I do? I'm going to make sure that, hey, I'm going to scan this system, but make sure you got somebody who's able to come in and reboot that system, right? Make sure you can give it some extra monitoring attention after the test. And that's part of that, like, hey, we're going to do this. If you want us to work on these core systems, make sure you've got your tech support handy. Because you don't want to be on that phone at 9 o'clock and you call the 800 number for your tech support and you hear that message that says, we're sorry, but your agreement does not entitle you to premium support. Because now you're down. So we also want to be careful of when the VP or the VP are affected. Why did I put that in quotes like that? Remember that secretary of the C-level executive? She's a very important person. Or he is a very important person, right? There's that person who's going to make your life really, really difficult, right? Why did you affect me? Well, if I had thought about the communications beforehand, hopefully they know it's coming, right? That's why that communications, getting permission and making sure that everybody knows is to make sure that VP is aware of it and can be somewhat understanding. Because it's sort of like, it's a little bit like that get out of jail card, because at least they knew it was coming. Nothing should happen, but this is when it's going to happen. And if it happens, you know. And it'll be temporary. So, like that one department where the systems went offline, we called up, we said, look, when this happens, it's going to be 5 minutes. So we knew, okay, anytime we hit any of these types of machines, it's going to be 5 minutes. Tell your people when it starts to happen, go get a cup of coffee. Because it'll just be gone. Right? You want to make sure that the staff can serve your customers, your clients, right? So, like, you don't want someone in the middle of, like, I'm trying to think, like a mortgage closing, right? That's a stressful time. And we deal with that. You've got to get the closing docs, and you've got people sitting there, like, antsy at the closing table to buy their house. Right? Where's my documents? So you don't want to take down the system that prints all those docs out. You want to make sure they've got that. Anytime, you're like if you're doing payroll, probably a bad time to look at an HR system for a pen test, like the day of payroll. Should wait at least until the checks are cut. And so when you're asking permission, be aware of that. Like, hey, this could be a catastrophic failure, so I want to schedule it, and I want to minimize the hurt from that. And what is allowed? Well, if you have a core system, like a core banking system, we don't test on a production system. And SCADA systems, you're not supposed to test on SCADA systems either. What do? You test the test system. And in theory, the two should be the same. Fingers crossed. Right? So make sure you have your tech support on call. This is a key thing. When you're negotiating these rules of engagement, make sure you know where tech support is, right? Make sure your techs are on call, right? That I'm going to call the guy, right? When I call my tech person, and he goes, "Oh, I'm sorry, I'm out with my wife and kids," or, "I'm putting my daughter to bed." It doesn't really make me feel real warm and fuzzy, right? "Oh man, I was in the middle of something, I'm not on call." When are you allowed to test? Does it have to be after hours? Make sure these people are available, right? I've had other clients that said you have to do it during business hours. Wow. Okay. If you insist. But work within the customer's guidelines, right? Sometimes you have to be client supervised. That actually was the one. I was sitting there, he was here, and I was here, and he was keeping an eye on the network, all the network monitoring tools. If he saw something he didn't like, he had the authority to pull the plug at any time. But that was his comfort level. If I took down a system and he noticed the adverse impact, he had the authority to pull the plug. And that's okay. I agree to that. These are the terms and conditions, right? This is part of my permission. So as an organization, what are we looking for, right? Do we want to see a clean report, and what does the management want to see? Are they just trying to meet a checkbox to say they did it, right? Is this a compliance-based audit? A couple things we should watch out, though, for is that a penetration test should never be something that's an evaluation for the current staff. That's not a good way to get permission. Obviously the staff doesn't want you to find anything because they're going to get evaluated on it. So they're not going to make your life any easier. And it's not going to win. Again, it's going to be this piece of garbage report. So hopefully the management is doing this for the right reasons, right? It should not be for the evaluation of the current staff or systems. There are certain things they look at, like patches, right? And if you've been telling your team to patch, and then you do the scan and you find tons of unpatched systems, well, that is what it is. But this shouldn't be the only metric, is one of the key things, I think. Whenever you're doing a penetration test, it shouldn't be the key factor for the staff evaluations. Definite failures, if you fail to meet the client's needs, you've got to get, when you ask for permission to break the system, to scan the system, your report has got to address their needs. So this is, you ask what their needs are, they give you permission, and you deliver a report. Because that's also part of that repeat customer cycle. This is part of that cycle of coming back again, because this is not something you do once and done. You're going to come back and do these again. As we're pen testers, we shouldn't deviate from scope. Right? If we find some surprise systems out there, we let them know. Hey, we found these out here, and you didn't tell us they were here. Right? But we're not going to go scan them automatically. I, as a contractor, wouldn't want to do it because that's billable time, and I don't want to waste my time. The customer, maybe they don't want us scanning those systems. Maybe they're fragile, too. They didn't tell us they were there. Right? Crossing over the line. We definitely don't want to say, hey, this is really cool. Like, we think this is cool in front of the client. That there's that image that a lot of times folks have of pen testers. It's like, Johnny, I hack stuff. I'm really cool because I hack stuff. But the business folks don't really want that. What do they care about? They care about what's the risk to our systems, right? Am I meeting my contractual requirements, right? Not am I doing the cool thing. So there's a little change there. But our call to action, whether we are hiring the pen testers or we're the pen testers ourselves, is we need to start somewhere. Because just coming out of that talk, and any other talk you hear about half of these breaches, if it's not physical security related or end user related, it seems to be patch related, right? It's sort of like we can go those three buckets. So we've got to do vulnerability scans and penetration tests. Right? Have to. We need to, when we come up with this agreement of what we're going to do, we have to stay within the lines. Oh man, I'd really like to go attack that. No, wait until you have permission. Wait until they give you the go-ahead on it. Okay? And, you'll have that get out of jail card, sort of, I have permission to do this, when you're doing this. So, if I was in the basement of a facility running these tests, and someone came knocking on my door, yes, I had my letter of authorization. All right. Was that a question back there? I thought I saw a hand raise. Set the scope and pace to what the customer's willing, right? As pen testers, we shouldn't, we have to push them a little bit, but we shouldn't totally run them over, right? Because this is painful for the customers. It shouldn't be, but it is, right? Because we all think our systems are secure. And, some progress is better than nothing. It's one of those, it's like, I've been on these where, okay, only do a vulnerability scan and don't actually do a penetration test until I say it's okay. And you're like, wow, that really kills it, right? Because you know the difference between a vulnerability scan and a penetration test. Vulnerability scan, I see what your weaknesses are. With a penetration test, I actually go into those tools and I try to purposely exploit them. I purposely send code. I try to escalate my privileges. So make sure that you stay within those lines, stay within those guidelines, right? Because for some organizations, even getting a vulnerability scan out of them is progress. Because they don't want to admit that they've got like 4,000 vulnerabilities across the enterprise. Nobody likes to hear that. But at least if we can make some progress, right? We just have to start somewhere and try to move in the right direction. And we want to make sure they don't retreat. So, we talk a lot, and I know that's 45 minutes? Pretty much where we said we were going to be. I wanted to make sure I left some time for questions and answers. Any questions? I don't know. Let's see. Oh, I said the wrong word, didn't I? Because I said, what is your favorite color? And the key is to have one to make some progress. Pick a color. That's your favorite color. So, blue. I'll stick around for a few minutes if anyone has any other questions. Otherwise, thank you for attending.